3 HOA board members stood there, frozen. One dropped his phone. Another started whispering, "We didn't see anything, right?" Too late. The shed door was wide open, and the words "Property of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms" were stamped on every single crate inside. And guess who had just filmed the whole thing? Viewer instantly wonders, wait, what? How do you even pull that off legally? And how does she not notice? Good question. Let me rewind just a little and explain how we got to the point where a bunch of HOA volunteers turned suburban tyrants ended up standing in a shed that could have been mistaken for a small military outpost. Spoiler alert, it wasn't illegal. In fact, everything about it was very, very legal. And unfortunately for Karen and her clipboard army, very, very documented. So, I'm Tyler, 35, former Army logistics. A man who genuinely enjoys peace and quiet, beer at 4 p.m., and mowing his lawn while listening to true crime podcasts. My property sits right on the edge of this little suburban patch of manufactured order called Briarwood Gardens. The name makes it sound like there's a spa and a koi pond. There's not. Just identical beige houses with exactly 2 flower pots per porch and a committee of HOA zealots who take neighborhood harmony more seriously than international diplomat. Now, here's the catch. My land technically isn't part of the HOA. Never was. I bought it a few years back, when an old farmhouse burned down and the developer gave up trying to include it in their Stepford Wives fantasy. I rebuilt a modest home with a detached steel-reinforced shed, because I like to work with tools and maybe I like feeling slightly doomsday prepper adjacent. And because of that exact setup, an old friend of mine, who happens to work for the ATF, once asked if I'd be willing to store some overflow materials in the shed temporarily. Before you freak out, no, it wasn't explosives or anything dangerous to the neighborhood. It was mostly seized equipment and parts waiting to be processed, locked down under federal protocol, with full documentation and a chain of custody so tight it could strangle a rhino. It was all above board, official, legal, quiet, until Karen sniffed it out. Karen, for those of you not familiar with the species, is the reigning president of the Briarwood Gardens HOA. She has 2 Shih Tzus, a white Lexus with eyelashes on the headlights, and the passive-aggressive energy of 1,000 middle school principals. Karen noticed my shed early on. It wasn't beige. It didn't have a decorative element. And worse, I refused to put up a little metal mailbox with the HOA's approved font. She hated me immediately, but couldn't do much, since again, not in her HOA. Or so I thought. It started with letters. Type. Triple underlined. Concerned resident notices non-compliance with neighborhood aesthetic. I laughed and filed them in my personal garbage can. Then came the in-person visit. Always around dinner. Always with a fake smile. Just checking on the zoning lines. You know, because we care. I didn't buy it, and I didn't open the shed unless I had to. Not because I was hiding anything, but because I knew what kind of trouble a little imagination and a lot of suburban nosiness could stir up. And yet Karen stirred. She rallied her little board of HOA enforcers. Tom, a retired dentist who thinks he's in the FBI, and Linda, a woman who once filed a noise complaint about butterflies. I'm not exaggerating. They formed a little patrol group, walking the block in pastel windbreakers and peering over fences with binoculars. I caught Tom on a ladder once, trying to look into my backyard from across the street. He nearly fell and sued me for hostile topography. Then last week, it happened. I was out at a hardware store, grabbing some replacement drill bits, when I got an alert from my backyard security cam. Motion near the shed. I pulled up the feed on my phone and, yep, there they were. Karen, Tom, and Linda, standing at the gate, holding bolt cutters. I thought, no way. No way they're actually doing it. But I underestimated just how entitled HOA zealots can get when they think they're restoring order. They cut the lock. I was 15 minutes away. I drove like my house was on fire. And by the time I arrived, They had already opened the shed door. I walked up just in time to see Linda pull out her phone to take a picture, before her hands started shaking so badly, she dropped it. Tom looked like he'd seen a ghost. Karen kept whispering that this was evidence, as if saying it would make her less guilty of trespassing on private property and breaking into a federally documented structure. So, I did what any sane person would do. I hit record, walked right up behind them, coffee in one hand, phone in the other. "Hey folks," I said, voice nice and calm, "hope you're enjoying your tour. Just so you know, everything in this shed is under federal custody, so congratulations, you just committed a felony. Multiple, probably." Karen turned beet red. Linda looked like she might pass out. Tom whispered, "We didn't know," and I said, "Exactly why you shouldn't go cutting into other people's sheds." And here's where things went from bad to federal. Karen tried to spin it. Said she thought I was building something unsafe. That she had a right, no, a duty, to check. But I had her on camera, breaking in, going through boxes labeled in bold, ATF evidence, do not tamper. Oh, and did I mention that the security footage automatically backs up to cloud storage in triplicate? Yeah. She picked the wrong shed, the wrong day, and definitely the wrong guy. Now, this is where you might think the story ends. HOA tries something stupid, gets caught, slinks away in embarrassment. But not Karen. Oh no. She doubled down. She walked off my property like she hadn't just committed a felony and muttered something about getting her lawyer. Which would have been adorable, if I hadn't already sent a heads-up to my contact at the ATF with the footage. But then, just as she was storming off, I noticed something odd. A piece of paper sticking out of her pocket. Looked like a map. Or a plan. I couldn't tell. But later that night, I checked my mailbox. Inside was a printed notice, on new letterhead I'd never seen before. It read, "Notice of induction. Your property has been voted into the Briarwood Gardens HOA, effective immediately." Yeah. You heard that right. They didn't just break into my shed. They tried to rewrite the neighborhood map to absorb me. And that was the moment I decided to go scorched earth. Karen had the audacity to march off my property like she hadn't just broken into a federal evidence shed, like she was still in control of this situation. Her heels clicked against the pavement with the kind of indignation only someone completely divorced from reality could muster. But me? I stood there watching, coffee cooling in my hand, already planning the next 10 steps ahead. Because the moment I saw that fake HOA letter claiming they'd inducted my property into their nonsense, that was the final straw. You don't get to break into my property, stumble into a federal operation, and then try to fake some bureaucratic power play like it's a high school club vote. By the next morning, I had 3 things ready. The footage from my backyard cameras, a folder of every communication the HOA had ever sent me, and a short, polite email to my contact in the ATF. His name's Derek, and let's just say when Derek gets an email with the subject line, "Unauthorized civilian access to active evidence lockup," he doesn't wait around. He called me within the hour, laughing so hard I could hear his coffee mug rattle on the desk. I explained what happened, sent over the footage, and by noon he'd already forwarded it to their legal department. His words, not mine. They're about to get very familiar with the concept of federal trespassing. Meanwhile, Karen wasn't backing down. That same afternoon, I found a folded notice taped to my front door. It was printed on official-looking letterhead, newly designed, with a fresh logo that somehow made the whole thing feel more like a cult than a neighborhood association. It claimed my property had been voted into the HOA jurisdiction retroactively. Retroactively. Like they were rewriting history with a clipboard and a vote count made up in someone's kitchen. The kicker? The bottom of the notice included a fine. $200 for a shed that did not meet HOA aesthetic standards. I stared at that letter for a good 30 seconds, trying to figure out if I'd accidentally walked into some sort of suburban twilight zone. Later that day, Tom and Linda, the same 2 clowns who had broken into my shed, showed up at my door again, this time with smug looks and a binder. Tom actually had the nerve to say, "We're trying to resolve this civilly." I invited them onto the porch and asked them to clarify something for me. Did civilly include felony trespassing, breaking and entering, and tampering with federal evidence? Linda started stammering something about just trying to protect the community, and I cut her off by handing them a copy of the footage, burned to a flash drive, in a little envelope labeled Exhibit A. Tom didn't say another word. He just turned beet red and walked away, binder under his arm like a kid who got caught copying homework. What they didn't know was that the ATF wasn't just reviewing the footage. They were already preparing a formal inquiry. Derek let me know their internal legal team was evaluating whether to press charges or simply issue a cease and desist through federal channels. Personally, I was hoping for charges. Karen needed to learn the hard way that playing dictator in a cul-de-sac doesn't hold up when you stumble into real-world consequences. But while the ATF was handling their side, I still had to deal with the circus act Karen was trying to stage in the neighborhood. 2 days after the break-in, I was summoned to an emergency HOA meeting. Summoned. Like I was suddenly a member of their cult and owed them an audience. Out of sheer curiosity, and because I knew it would be hilarious, I showed up. The meeting was held in Karen's garage, decorated like it was some corporate seminar, with plastic chairs, lemonade, and a hand-lettered sign that said Briarwood Gardens Civic Council. I nearly laughed out loud. Karen stood at the front, flanked by Tom and Linda, and opened the meeting with the kind of theatrical monologue usually reserved for courtroom dramas or daytime soaps. She claimed I was endangering the community by storing unauthorized military materials. She even pulled out a blown-up photo of the crates, intentionally blurry and ominously labeled with the words, "hazardous content." I recognized the photo. It was one Linda tried to take before dropping her phone. I let her go on for 5 minutes before raising my hand like a good little student. When she reluctantly acknowledged me, I asked one simple question. "Are you aware that you're accusing a federal contractor of illegally storing evidence legally documented and held under ATF authority, because if so, I hope you've got a very good lawyer?" The room went silent. One neighbor coughed. Karen's face twitched, but she doubled down, saying she had consulted a lawyer already and was prepared to bring the matter to court. That was cute, because 10 minutes later, while still at the meeting, I received a call from Derek. Loud enough for the entire room to hear, I answered with a cheery, "Hey, Derek, how's the federal investigation into trespassing going?" Karen's face went pale. But the best part came 2 days after that meeting. Derek called again, this time more serious. He told me the ATF had finished its internal review, and while they wouldn't be filing criminal charges against the HOA board yet, they were formally sending a cease and desist, notifying the HOA that they had violated federal property boundaries, tampered with ongoing evidence, and potentially obstructed an active investigation. The letter, he assured me, would be delivered directly. By courier. With a signature required. And oh yeah, they included language stating that any further interaction with the storage area would be considered obstruction of justice. The cherry on top? The HOA's insurance provider was being notified. Good luck explaining that at the next budget meeting. When the letter arrived, I wasn't home, but my neighbor, Ted, texted me the moment he saw a suited man hand-deliver it to Karen's front door. Apparently, she stood there like a statue for 10 minutes after reading it, clutching the envelope like it was a court summons from God himself. That same night, the HOA website mysteriously went offline. I don't know if it was fear, embarrassment, or some combination of both, but Karen didn't show her face outside for a solid 48 hours. When she finally did, she was quieter, less smug. But I knew her well enough to recognize the gears still turning in her head. She wasn't done. And sure enough, 3 days later, I got a certified letter in the mail. Not from Karen. Not from the HOA. From their attorney. A man I had never heard of before, who claimed he was representing the collective interests of the Briarwood Gardens Civic Association. According to the letter, I was being accused of reckless endangerment, possession of prohibited materials, and, my favorite, conduct unbecoming of a community member. They were trying to scare me. Or, more likely, trying to paper over their idiocy with enough legal jargon to shift the blame. I smiled, folded the letter, and dropped it onto my growing pile of HOA stupidity. Because what Karen didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that by faking my inclusion into their HOA, they had accidentally triggered a clause in their own charter. A clause that made the entire structure of the HOA illegal. And I had the documentation to prove it. All of it. The next move wouldn't be about federal law. It would be about burning their little empire down from the inside out. The thing about people like Karen is they never know when to quit. She could have taken the warning from the ATF and backed off. She could have told her little clipboard cult to mind their business, deleted her shady, retroactive induction letters, and quietly gone back to measuring the length of people's grass. But no. Karen saw the federal cease and desist and decided it was a challenge. And that was perfect for me, because I had already started pulling threads that would unravel everything she had spent years pretending to control. It started with the fake induction letter. The one that claimed my property had been voted into the HOA. That's not how HOAs work. You can't just draw lines around people's land and demand compliance like you're building a medieval kingdom. But I was curious. I wanted to know how far back this fiction went, so I pulled the original county records for the Briarwood Gardens development. Turns out, their HOA charter had a strict border set in stone when the neighborhood was created 15 years ago. My land had never been part of it, never been offered an opt-in, and most importantly, was on a separately recorded deed. But somewhere along the line, about 2 years ago, a quiet amendment had been filed by the HOA board claiming an expansion of boundaries for community uniformity. It wasn't legally binding. It wasn't even approved by the county. But they had filed it anyway and then started acting like it was legitimate. That's fraud, plain and simple. So I called a real estate attorney, handed him the files, and asked one question. How fast can we make this implode? He smiled and said, faster than you'd think. He reviewed the HOA's governing documents, the bylaws, the fraudulent expansion, and the way they had tried to find me based on that lie. He found not one but 3 clauses that voided their ability to enforce rules outside their legally defined perimeter. And the moment they tried to apply those rules to my property, they violated their own charter. That gave us standing not just to challenge the HOA's authority, but to question its very existence. Meanwhile, Karen was still busy playing dictator. She sent out another neighborhood-wide email, one of her signature all-caps blasts, accusing me of endangering the community, of spreading misinformation, and of aggressively resisting integration into a shared neighborhood vision. She made it sound like I was running some anarchist commune instead of a house with a shed. But here's the part she didn't see coming. The more she yelled, the more her neighbors started getting curious. I wasn't the only one tired of her nonsense. People started talking. Quietly at first. Then louder. A couple on the corner, retired teachers, told me Karen once tried to fine them for planting marigolds because they weren't on the approved flora list. Another neighbor said she got written up for having a dog that barked during daylight hours. One guy even confessed he paid a bogus review fee after painting his garage door because Karen told him it was mandatory. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. The neighborhood had been living under a regime of arbitrary fines, made-up rules and fake authority, and they were starting to realize it. That gave me an idea. I printed out a 1-page flyer explaining the legal situation. No drama, no insults. Just facts. It listed the original HOA boundary, showed how my property wasn't included, explained how the expansion wasn't legal, and encouraged homeowners to request a copy of their own property record. I slipped it into mailboxes on a Sunday morning while walking my dog. 2 days later, Karen was screaming in the street about illegal propaganda. That scream, by the way, was caught on video by at least 2 teenagers and posted online with the caption, "HOA Karen goes feral over printer paper." It hit 30,000 views in a day. The pressure kept building. My lawyer filed a formal complaint with the county zoning board and requested an emergency review of the HOA's charter. We submitted evidence that their boundaries had been illegally extended, their enforcement overreach had violated property rights, and their leadership had knowingly issued fraudulent fines. That's when the real hammer dropped. The county informed the HOA that it was under investigation for misuse of authority and that all enforcement actions were to be suspended immediately. Karen received the notice in person, from a zoning officer who walked right up to her front door in the middle of one of her morning patrols. She tried to argue. He handed her a printed copy of the complaint and walked away without saying another word. Suddenly, the HOA board meetings got very quiet. Then they got very private. But it was too late. Word had spread. People started organizing. A few neighbors asked to see the HOA's financial records, which they're legally entitled to. Karen resisted. That's when someone found out the HOA had a second account, unlisted on the public disclosures, used for community improvement initiatives. Except none of those initiatives ever happened. No new benches. No extra landscaping. No community event. Just thousands of dollars in dues disappearing into what looked suspiciously like Karen's personal vacation fund. And that was it. The final crack in the dam. At the next board meeting, someone stood up, someone quiet, older, who never made waves, and demanded Karen resign. He had a binder, with numbers, printouts, checks written to cash. The room exploded. Voices yelling over each other. Karen trying to shout everyone down. And me? I just stood in the back, sipping lemonade. Watching the fireworks. Watching the queen of beige tyranny melt under the spotlight she had lit for herself. But I wasn't done yet. With the HOA's legal foundation crumbling, we submitted one last filing to the county. A request to formally dissolve the HOA charter on the grounds of fraud, misuse of authority, and member misrepresentation. The county had no choice but to investigate. When their findings came in, they were brutal. The charter was deemed void due to procedural misconduct. The bank accounts were frozen pending further financial review. And just like that, Briarwood Gardens HOA ceased to exist. You'd think that would be the end of it. You'd think Karen would pack up her clipboards, delete her mailing list, and disappear into the beige siding of her home like the ghost of HOA past. But you'd be underestimating the raw power of petty delusion. Because a week later, just when things were starting to settle down, I got another notice. Different logo. Different letterhead. Same deranged signature. Karen had apparently started something called the Briarwood Civic Wellness Committee. No legal power, no funding, just a Facebook page and a bad attitude. And taped to the notice was a warning. All structures must still conform to neighborhood unity guidelines. She really thought she could start all over again. A fake HOA built from the ashes of the old one. But this time, she wasn't trying to fight me with fines or fake vote. This time, she was trying to get under my skin the old-fashioned way, by spying. Because 2 days after that letter, I caught a new camera installed in a tree at the edge of my yard. Pointed directly at my back patio. Hidden behind a bundle of leaves. When I traced the angle, I found the camera's signal. It linked directly to Karen's Wi-Fi. And that's when I realized something. The HOA might be gone. But Karen had just declared war. And she was about to find out I still had a few more cards to play. You'd think getting the HOA dissolved, the charter shredded, and the bank accounts frozen would have been enough for Karen to pack it in. But no. Karen didn't see defeat. She saw a rebranding opportunity. Like she was launching the HOA 2.0, except this time with zero legal authority and even less self-awareness. She called it the Briarwood Civic Wellness Committee. No one asked for it. No one voted for it. But she printed flyers anyway, slapped them on every mailbox, and went back to her favorite pastime, harassing people under the illusion of power. And of course, I was still target number one. The first time I noticed the camera, I thought maybe I was just being paranoid. It was subtle, tucked into a clump of leaves in the tree between my property and hers. A little too perfectly angled at my patio. I wasn't even doing anything interesting out there. Just reading, sipping coffee, watching squirrels fight over a peanut. But Karen's obsession had moved beyond fines and bylaws. Now she was spying. I traced the signal from the camera, because yes, I know how to do that, and sure enough, it linked to a network that practically screamed her name. Wellness HQ. Real subtle. I didn't go nuclear right away. That's the thing with people like Karen. If you react too fast, they think they've gotten under your skin. You've got to play it slow. Make them think they're in control. I installed a dummy camera of my own, right on the shed, pointed nowhere important, just to see if she'd react. Within 2 days, her camera was gone. Pulled from the tree like it had never been there. Classic Karen move. Retreat, regroup, pretend it never happened. But she didn't stop. A week later, another flyer appeared on my door. Same tone. Same font. Same ridiculous language. It warned me that excessive mechanical activity on my property had been noted by the Civic Wellness Committee. Apparently, using a power drill was now a threat to neighborhood serenity. And that's when I decided to bring the storm. See, what Karen didn't know was that the ATF investigation into her trespass wasn't technically closed. They hadn't filed charges, but they had flagged her name in relation to the footage she tried to use in her fake lawsuit against me. Remember the blurry photo of the ATF crates she showed at the emergency meeting? Yeah. Turns out she shared that image publicly, in a Facebook group, in a fake email blast, and in her legal complaint. That's 3 separate counts of unauthorized distribution of evidence tied to an active federal case. It had flown under the radar because no one took her seriously. But now that she'd started spying and launching her little wellness committee, I figured it was time to give the ATF a reason to take another look. So I called Derek. Told him what she'd been up to. He didn't laugh this time. He sighed, then muttered something about people who think federal is just a fancy word for optional. He asked for copies of everything. The camera signal trace, the flyers, the social media posts. I sent it all, and a few days later, he called me back. The Bureau had reopened their file. In the meantime, Karen was throwing a party. Not just any party. A neighborhood bunco night. If you've never been to a suburban bunco night, imagine a casino-themed cult meeting hosted by women in bedazzled sweaters and passive-aggressive smiles. It's less about the dice and more about the wine and gossip. And Karen made sure to invite everyone, well, everyone she liked. I didn't get an invite, obviously, but my neighbor Ted did. He told me it was being held in Karen's house, with full snacks, wine pairings, and a community standards chat planned between rounds. Because nothing says fun like finger sandwiches and zoning threat. The day of the party I kept to myself. Sat in the backyard. Listened to the wind. Let the tension settle. Then around 8:30 p.m., I heard the first siren. Not loud. Not rushed. Just a low, steady whoop from a black SUV with government plates rolling down the street. Then another. Then 2 unmarked cars behind it. They stopped right in front of Karen's house. No lights. No drama. Just a quiet, coordinated movement of 3 agents stepping out, adjusting jackets, and walking up to her door. Inside, the bunco ladies were on round 3, mid-giggle, wine flowing. Someone must have opened the door expecting another guest, because what followed was a chorus of gasps, a thud, and then the unmistakable silence that only happens when someone's entire world collapses in a moment. Karen was escorted out of her own house in pink slippers and a rhinestone headband, clutching a wine glass and demanding to see a warrant. She got one. Signed. Stamped. Sealed. The charges were serious enough to warrant a full search. Evidence tampering. Unauthorized distribution of classified material. Obstruction of an investigation. She tried to argue that it was all just HOA business, that she was protecting the community. that the photos weren't real. The agents didn't argue. They walked her down the driveway, past half the neighborhood, past the ladies still holding their little scoring cards, and placed her gently into the back of the SUV. I didn't record it. I didn't have to. Someone else did. A teenager down the block caught the whole thing on their phone and uploaded it to Reddit that same night. The title was pure gold. Karen gets raided during bunco night after trying to police a shed. It exploded. Thousands of views in hours. Then tens of thousands. People in the comments were already crafting theories, backstories, memes. My favorite was a gif of Karen being let out, overlaid with the phrase, "This is what happens when HOA becomes CIA." Karen spent the night in federal holding, but she wasn't arrested. They questioned her, fingerprinted her, took her phone and laptop for evidence, and released her with a court date and a very strict gag order. That meant no more flyers, no more wellness committee, no more suburban surveillance programs. She came home the next morning looking like someone had erased her soul with a wet napkin. Her mailbox was already full of refund demands from neighbors who'd donated to her committee. Her Facebook group had been shut down. The camera in the tree? Disconnected, confiscated, gone. I thought maybe, finally, she'd be done. That she'd sit quietly in her house, bake apology cookies, and start writing that self-help memoir she always hinted at. But on the following Friday, as I was planting tomatoes in my garden, she walked past the edge of my property. Not on it. Just close enough. She didn't say a word. Just stared. And smiled. Not the kind of smile you give a neighbor. The kind of smile that says, "This isn't over. That's fine. Because I'm not done either." Karen may have lost her HOA, her committee, and her precious illusion of control. But I still have the shed. And as far as I'm concerned, it's the most heavily defended lawn ornament in the country. Let her try something again. I've got backup now. Legal, federal, and digital. And next time she steps out of line, it won't be bunco night that gets ruined. It'll be the rest of her life.